Welcome to the first session of the HS2 Select Committee in the new Parliament. The only decision taken so far is that I have been re-elected as, or reappointed as, the Chairman. Since we met, we have lost our colleague, Mr. Thornton, who was a valued colleague, and the committee will be writing to him to express thanks for the hard work that he put in, and he was an extremely easy person to get on with, and we wish him well in whatever future endeavours he puts his mind to. For the time being, we're going to continue with our current membership as per the House Order of the 29th of April 2014 and the Bill's representation on Thursday the 28th of April. No doubt the issue of membership will be addressed in due course and hopefully in the next few weeks. We published our draft programme for the coming fortnight last Wednesday, and the committee has now approved it. This afternoon we hear petitions from various areas, including South Bucks. Tomorrow we hear 2 petitions from Cheshire, and we have a briefing on ground settlement issues. We also hear from HS2 on their response, which the Department of Transport published last week, to our interim report before the election, and we're currently digesting the contents of that report. On Thursday we're going to visit Aylesbury and Wendover, and later in the month we will visit other parts of Buckinghamshire and Amersham constituency on the 22nd of June, and Buckingham constituency on the 26th of June. Fitting these visits into our programme has required some flexibility from petitioners from other areas, especially Hillingdon. One of the more difficult problems we have is the government's majority is rather smaller than the last government's majority, and being able to escape Westminster becomes a little more difficult. We are especially grateful to petitioners for accommodating these changes to our programme, and we need to, when we need to make changes to manage the visits. After this week, we'll continue with the Colne Valley and Outer London areas. Following that, we'll want to hear the substantive case for the longer Chilterns Tunnel before we rise for the summer recess. We will be writing to Chilterns petitioners later this week to invite them to work together on petitioning. Cheryl Gillam MP will give an introduction to the Chilterns Tunnel case on the 17th of June. I have a point to clarify in the government's interim report. In paragraph 60, on the committee's interim report, in paragraph 65, the report said the petitioners from Worm Leighton wanted the tunnel. It should have said they wanted the cutting. However, our view remains that the construction work of this type required to effect a tunnel or cutting would be unduly disruptive in the area. We now move to hear the first petition, which is Mr. and Mrs. Hooper. Welcome. Are you happy for HS2 to give an introduction, or do you just want to kick straight off?
I'm happy to go through it if...
okay, do you want to show where Mr. and Mrs. Hooper...
absolutely. I'll ask if we could put up P6052, which gives you a familiar plan.
And it feels like already we've never been away.
And you may recall such plans in the past, but this gives you an idea where Mr. and Mrs. Hooper live, just in Greatworth, on the Helmden Road. And at this point, of course, you may recall the HS2 scheme is moving into a cut-and-cover tunnel, which is shown with the black and green marking. And I can give you a bit of a close-up. P6053. Again, probably familiar plan, but you'll see here Mr. and Mrs. Hooper's property is shown marked red. It's on Helmden Road. The grey signifies land in the bill limits. There's there are works done to Helmden Road to realign it, which is why the grey comes down Helmden Road. But Mr. and Mrs. Hooper's property is not required, or any part of it is not required for the scheme. There is an aerial photograph of it. Helps P6054, and then I'll just show you the construction. P6054 shows the location of their house in relation to the village of Greatworth. And could I just show you a construction plan, P6055. This, again, I'm sure will be the memories of this are flooding back, if they haven't already, that this is a standard construction plan in the vicinity. You'll see the brown area is area of working, which is to create the cut-and-cover tunnel in that location, which provides some mitigation for the village of Greatworth. And could I just take you then to P6057, because I know one of the issues Mr. Super concerned about is the visual effects of the tunnel. You'll see here their property again marked in red, and it's quite faint, but the settlement, but their property is there red, and it's a cross section taken. It's obviously at a diagonal, because if one took a cross section straight up, it would be through the tunnel. But it's at a diagonal, and I'll just show you that in this area. Just if I show you that is the tunnel portal, and then there is a transformer station just there. And if I show you that in cross section P6058. This gives you, in the usual way, an indication of how things will appear and what would be visible and what would not. It's about 528 metres from their property to the main line along this diagonal, and in the intervening area there is an area of landscaping with trees, and then of course beyond that there is the portal building access track. That's a slice, a diagonal slice through the transformer station, a noise barrier and the main line. And we have I'll let Mr. and Mrs. Super develop whatever they want. There is in the response pack the standard sorts of exhibits you've seen in the past, which look at the effects in terms of construction noise and operational noise, which I can come to if those are issues, but there are noise maps showing the contours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Strawn. Mr. Hooper.
Okay, Mr. Chairman and committee members, thank you for allowing me to present this petition, and I will be speaking on behalf of my wife, Donna Hooper, as well as myself. Firstly, I'd like to say that we fully support the case put forward by Mr. Nicholas Peart on behalf of Greatworth Parish Council and other Greatworth residents on the 10th of February 2015. Many of the concerns raised in our petition were covered by Mr. Peart, and I don't wish to reiterate the bulk of the evidence that he presented. However, there are a few matters that I would like to cover today. Firstly, I'd like to make a few comments about the promoter's response document to our petition. The PRD contains several responses that don't address the concerns that we raised, and other responses that address matters that weren't even mentioned in our petition. This leads me to believe that a lot of the document was copied directly from other PRDs. For example, in our response to our concerns regarding highways and rights-of-way, the promoter merely restates what is written in the environmental statement and doesn't answer any of the specific concerns raised. I'd like to move on now to visual impact. The visual impact on Greatworth has already been described by Mr. Peart in the Parish Council's petition. However, I would like to illustrate how it will impinge on the view from our property and other properties in the immediate vicinity. The photo montage, which is Exhibit A1054, this shows the current baseline, 2013, and Operation Year 1, 2026. This view is taken from the bend in Helmden Road at the north end of Astrel Row near to Astrel House. The PRD and the photo montage refer to the visual impact from here as, quote, the closest part of the village to the southern portal of the Greatworth Green Tunnel. Now, the tunnel portal is clearly visible from here. However, from the location of our property further along Helmden Road, we believe the tunnel portal will be even more prominent as we will be looking at it across the valley. I forwarded two photographs, which is Exhibit 1053, from our property looking towards the area of the portal. However, these two-dimensional images do not show the contours adequately, but the cross-section profile that has already been shown, P6058, from the promoter's evidence, may give a clear understanding of the landscape contours. There you can actually see that the land dips down from our property down towards where the portal is. Our PRD states that the plantings intended for screening will partially screen the portal by year 15 of operation up to year 60 of operation, we feel it's a small comfort for our probable lifetime. As the portal will be clearly visible from our property and those of our neighbours, we request that the portal is clad in a suitable material to lessen the unsightly visual impact of a concrete construction and to help it to blend into the landscape. We move on to noise. As outlined in our petition in paragraph 9, the promoters consider that noise mitigation is not necessary where average noise levels are below 50 decibels. I note from the promoters' noise assessment location map that noise level monitoring equipment was installed at number 5 Astral Row and also at number 11 Astral Row, which is close to the point where the photomontage is sited. As mentioned in my reference to visual impact, we are actually across an open valley from the portal and will be more susceptible to the noise, whereas those properties at the top end of Astral Row will have some element of shielding by the raised part of the realigned road leaving the village. In the promoter's response document, they concede that, and I quote, "At Helmden Road, Greatworth, the proposed scheme is likely to cause an adverse noise effect during construction. Therefore, we respectfully request that during the construction, adequate protection is provided, such as triple glazing or other suitable alternative." I'd like to move now on to the height of the line. Mr. Peart outlined the case for lowering the height of the line, as this would enable an extension of the Green Tunnel at Greatworth and thus reduce the impact of noise and reduce the visual impact on Greatworth residents. Our PRD states that, quote, "The cost could not be justified for the limited environmental benefits that would be gained." I also note that the committee's interim report states that the Green Tunnel extension is not justified. However, I would like to point out that of the parish councils in our section of the line, CFA 15, Boddington, Chippen Warden, Greatworth, Thorpe Mandeville, as well as South Northants District Council, all requested the line height to be lowered in their petitions. In addition, at a forum of councils in the area, CFA 15, all of the representatives of the other parish councils in that area were supportive of lowering the line height. Therefore, I'd like to point out that the benefits to the whole of this section across South Northamptonshire are significantly greater than the benefits considered for Greatworth in isolation. In addition, I understand that adjoining areas in Buckinghamshire and Warwickshire have also requested the line to be lowered. This seems to be a significant area to dismiss with the phrase limited environmental benefits. Moving on to compensation. In the PRD, the promoters state, quote, "Compensation is assessed by reference to any diminution of value of the claimant's interest in land caused by the interference with their private right." Now, we do not have a valuation of our property prior to the announcement of HS2 route, but based on prices in the village, we estimate a value of around about £320,000. We did arrange a valuation of our property in 2012 after the route of HS2 was announced, and were given a range of 240 to 260,000, which the agent indicated was reduced due to HS2. I'd like to point out that we do not intend to move, as we lived here for 36 years and we really love Greatworth. Although properties in Greatworth are selling, the effects of HS2 should not be underestimated. I have spoken to several new residents, and of these, 2 said that HS2 didn't bother them, and 4 told me that the price was low enough to overcome their concerns. In addition, I personally know of 9 properties in Greatworth that have been on the market in the last 3 years that have had prospective buyers drop out due to HS2. If we could have P6067 in the promoter's evidence, please. In the promoter's evidence, this shows that the dividing line between those who are entitled to compensation, i.e. within 300 metres of the centre of the line, and those not entitled to any compensation. My inquiries with neighbouring residents showed that this dividing line is between number 6 and number 7 Astrel Row. Both properties are going to be subject to the same degree of disruption and devaluation, so it is grossly unfair that the owners of one property are entitled to compensation, whilst the owners of the adjacent property are not. How can this compensation scheme be justified? If we could have P6064, please, on the promoter's evidence. The promoter's evidence here on the sound contours, noise contours, I beg your pardon, clearly shows that our property is closer to the significant noise effects than some of the properties who are actually entitled to compensation, and yet we are entitled to nothing. That's shown by the curve on the illustration there, and I believe that relates to the point I made earlier of being across the valley. Our belief is that any property owner whose property has been devalued by the proposed scheme should be entitled to full compensation for that loss. The general response appears to be that it would cost the taxpayer too much and make the proposed scheme unviable. We therefore ask why we, and others in our position, should be expected to subsidise this project by accepting a loss in the equity of our property. I'd like to move on to public rights of way. As also suggested by other petitioners in our area, we would like the promoters to implement measures to improve the network of public rights of way in our area. Specifically, we would like the promoter to provide links between bridleways AN14 and AN37, a link between footpaths AN4, AN40 and AN39, and a link or to join up between footpaths AN13, AN7, AN9 and AN10. We believe that all this could be achieved on land that will be acquired by the promoter to build the line or for the diversion of the Welsh Lane during the works period. None of this would require the diversion of any existing rights-of-way, and what we propose are additional rights-of-way as a lasting legacy for our community, which will suffer greatly from HS2, but will get no other benefit for it. I would like to suggest that, or request, that HS2 would consult with Northamptonshire County Council and also with a small group of local residents to discuss further how these things could be developed. And I was at a forum meeting on Friday with the parish councils in our area, the district council and the county council. And the county councillors did mention that the HS2 Limited have been consulting with the local area network. And they claim that the local area network was actually set up to provide the county council, and that negotiations should actually go through the county council and not the local area network. In addition, we would like to request that where bridleways cross the railway via overbridges, to ensure that the height of the barriers at the side of the overbridges are high enough to ensure the safety of a rider thrown from a horse. I'd like to refer quickly to... sorry.
Do you know which height this is?
Beg your pardon?
Do you know what height that is?
I don't offhand, no.
But the British Horse Society can probably tell
I just
us.
want to show that as people are riding over on horses, if a horse should be struck by a train or by any reason whatsoever, that safety precautions are there. Sorry, I just had a note to say that the consultation was with the local access forum, not the local area network that I mentioned. Regarding the presentation done by Mr Nicholas Ward, we'd just like to say that we fully support what was said by Mr Nicholas Ward when he addressed the committee on the 17th of March. We would ask the committee to require that the promoter to produce a detailed response to the various requests made by Nicholas and Veronica Ward. They haven't actually received any response as yet. I'd like to move on now to misinformation presented by HS2 Limited. Right from the outset, HS2 Limited had given misleading information. As a community severely affected by the project, Greatworth was selected as one of the venues for the road shows, used to inform the public in advance of the consultation. One of the features was a sound booth in which there was a simulation of a high-speed train passing Greatworth. The map showed that the point of the simulation was around 25 metres from our property on Helmden Road. The simulation began with a rather noisy bird chirping, a bus passing by, and then there was a slight swoosh, and a helpful note came on the screen to inform us that the train was passing by at this point. However, the documentation that was available to the public at the same roadshow included a map of our area with areas of, quote, noticeable noise increase. These were highlighted in grey. This highlighted area included Helmden Road, Ashwell Road, Whitton Close and part of Peveril Road. It extended way beyond the point where the so-called sound simulation was supposed to indicate the minimal sound of a passing train. I queried this with several HS2 representatives at the roadshow, including the sound expert who was there, and nobody was able to give me any explanation at all. I then filled in one of the information request forms asking for an explanation and did not receive the courtesy of a reply. Since then, the route has moved further away from Greatworth. So the point I'm trying to make is that with no explanation for the contradictory information, I believe that the sound booth was a gimmick intended to fool the community. And I believe it also casts severe doubt on the validity of current noise projections by the promoters. In conclusion, I would like to thank the committee for your patience and understanding of our concerns. And I also understand that a project of this significance is bound to cause disruption to those close to the route. But what we do ask for is for reasonable mitigation during construction and operation, and a compensation scheme that is fair to everyone who suffers any devaluation in their property. In summary, we respectfully request that the committee consider the following points. 1. That the southern portal of the Greatworth Green Tunnel is constructed in a manner to minimise the unsightly visual impact of a...
I didn't quite catch the first bit of that one, that last paragraph, sorry.
If
you just repeat what you just said.
The conclusion.
Well, about half a second ago, just with that last sentence.
In summary, we request that the committee consider the following. Number 1, that the southern portal of the Greatworth Green Tunnel is constructed in a manner to minimise the unsightly visual impact of a concrete construction. Number 2, that adequate protection is provided, such as triple glazing or other suitable alternative, to mitigate the adverse noise effect which is admitted by the promoter during construction. Number 3, that the committee ask the promoter to reconsider the cost-benefit equation for lowering the line height, giving full consideration to the benefit to the whole of South Northamptonshire and neighbouring counties, and not just the benefit to the Greatworth section. We know this can be achieved and is financially viable as it was proposed prior to the 2012 revision. Number 4, that the committee consider the gross unfairness of the current compensation scheme and press for a fairer system that is based on real loss and not based on an arbitrary demarcation. Number 5, that additional rights-of-way be provided by the promoter to link current ones, and that the height of the barriers on overbridges are high enough to allay safety concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything at all, Mrs. Hooper?
No, I think Richard's covered everything. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
It's one of the best presentations we've had. It's covered things clearly without
Thank you.
wasting time.
Henry.
Just a very quick one. Apologies if I missed this, but on the triple glazing.
Yes.
This is in respect of mitigating noise during construction,
Construction.
or what about the noise if this project goes ahead and the railway is opened up?
Well, I believe that during operation the noise levels will be lower, but in the PRD that we received, the promoter did say that there would, during construction, there would be the significant noise effects.
Yes. And just remind me, triple glazing by a factor of what reduces noise compared to double glazing?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a fairly standard thing that triple glazing would obviously reduce the noise more than double glazing would. But as I said, other suitable methods would also be just to try and get it down to an acceptable level.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hoop.
Okay.
Mr. Strawn.
Thank you very much. First of all, can I just make a general point of observation? Mr. Hooper raised the issue of the PRD responding to a number of points, and I wasn't entirely sure which points were of concern, but if there are points of concern, no doubt he can let us know. But it's certainly the case that the petition response document seeks to give a comprehensive response to a number of points that were raised in the petition. There were some general points raised about highways and public rights of way, and they're covered in a comprehensive manner. And if it's gone beyond the concerns that are expressed by Mr. Hooper, I hope that doesn't cause him any inconvenience, but it shows how the response covers a number of things, such as the location of the highway, the realignment of Helmden Road in that area. Can I just deal with the points that Mr. Hooper raised in turn, hopefully relatively quickly? First of all, the portal design, as indicated in the environmental statement, and I showed you in the cross-section, there's planting proposed on the landscaping which will, in time, of course, help to conceal the portal, certainly from Mr. Hooper's property. Of course, planting takes some while to establish, but certainly it will, as the cross-section showed, eventually conceal the portal. Mr. Hooper mentioned the design of the portal itself. That is a matter which is subject to control through the detailed design process. And so, of course, the local authority will have an input in agreeing on the final appearance of the design portal, which I know is of concern. So that is something which is still a matter for detailed design. The issue of noise, can I just... we've got actually up on screen a diagram showing the noise. Can I just go back one stage to help you and Mr. Hooper in that respect? If one turns to P6062, you'll see that, and no doubt again this will become familiar territory, there are a number of points where noise assessments were made from. In fact, in the response document to Mr. Hooper, you'll see the 272333 modelling point was the one used in the response document, which is closer to construction and the railway, than considerably closer than Mr. Hooper's property. So it's in terms of noise effects likely to be noisier there than at his property. In fact, 271489 is closer to Mr. Hooper's property, but still closer to the railway. And if one goes back to the noise modelling, 6063 shows the contours, which Mr. Hooper was referring to a moment ago, and you can see that the relevant contours are away from Mr. Hooper's properties and the other properties. The grey contour is the 40 to 55 dB contour at night, and the 50 to 65 at day. And I know the committee's heard a lot about those levels, but they are both far away, which is a feature, of course, of the cut and cover tunnel. And 6064 was the one we had on a moment ago, showing again that expressed in terms of the relevant contours and whether or not there's likely to be a significant effect. So Mr. Hooper's raised the issue of construction noise, so I just need to take you to P6065 in the context of triple glazing. Here we've got that modelling assessment point I referred you to a moment ago, 271489, The top level, as you recall, are existing noise levels, 46 during the day, 41 at night, and then with a highest nighttime max of 71, no doubt reflecting the fact this is on a road, as one the committee's heard in the past. The noise during construction is the next table down, and there are not, the noise during construction is 49 dB typical, with a 60 dB LEQ highest monthly outdoor, and that's mainly arising from the realignments of the road, the Helmden Road, as indicated in that box. There isn't any need on this analysis for any triple glazing in relation to these effects. I know it's a concern to Mr. Hoover, but this analysis is indicating it's not a problem in terms of triple glazing. However, just by way of reassurance, the Code of Construction practice, of course, has a process for monitoring of the noise during the construction process, and the Control of Pollution Act processes which the contractor will have to follow. So these are things which will be subject to further control during the construction phase. And then finally, the operational position is set out in the bottom part of the table, where you'll see that there is a noise change of 3 dB during the day and 1 at night. But in the context of the scheme, and those increases are not considered to be significant increases, such as to require additional measures. So that explains the response. But I hope that provides some reassurance to Mr. Hoover. The height of the line, I wasn't intending to say anything more about, because it's something the committee has looked at already in the wider context. Compensation P6067, the committee will be familiar with this map. As no land's required from Mr. and Mrs. Hooper, there's no compensation arising from the taking of land. There are these zones of homeowner payments, where homeowner payments are made where measured from the proximity to the line. Mr. and Mrs. Hooper's property falls some way away from the furthermost band, and you've had those bands explained to you previously, but in essence, of course, if Mr. Hooper, Mr. and Mrs. Hooper are concerned, there is, of course, the need to sell scheme that they can apply under if they wish to. There is, during operation, of course, a statutory compensation procedure 1 year after the lines come into operation, if that is applicable to them and which they wanted to apply. I think I can just clear up something on public rights of way. Public rights of way have been reinstated in this area where they've been affected by the line. There was a question raised about bridleways crossing the line. I believe, although I can correct this, we think it's about 1.8 metres is the height of parapet to have regard to the British Horse Society. I may need to check that, but I think it's approximately 1.8 metres. What the project has said previously is that they will design those bridleways with horse riders in mind, taking account of those recommended guidelines as to the heights of the parapets. So I hope I can assure him on that. The other public rights of way changes that Mr. and Mrs. Hooper and others might wish to see are, of course, primarily a matter for the relevant highway authority, the county council, and of course they would potentially affect land ownership and taking of land for a different purpose. But they are matters that they can be pursued by a local highway authority if they want to change any of the public rights of way. We have shown on a plan how the public rights of way are reinstated in this area. 6061, just so you can get a flavour. I think you may have seen this already. But the general principle is to try and reinstate wherever the line affects public rights of way to provide a replacement route to ensure there's no severing of the network. And I think Mr. Hooper's talking about a further improvement of the network rather than the... on misleading information...
The reason that's possible is because of the green tunnel.
The reinstatement, sorry. Or the... I see, the improvements.
Many of the existing footpaths will be temporarily stopped during the construction of the cut and cover. but they can be reinstated and will be because of the green tunnel has it.
That's certainly the case, yes. There's a greater opportunity to do that. That does, of course, mean whilst they're being constructed, there's a greater disruption in other circumstances. Finally, can I just deal with the point that raised about misleading information? Mr. Hooper's raised a concern about a noise lab or a noise experience of the train passing. I don't have the details and I don't know what information was requested. If Mr. Hooper wants any further information, please I'm very happy to arrange for further information about that. Certainly the noise levels that we've shown and predicted, and I've taken you through the maps a moment ago, do show those relatively confined levels of noise, and that's in part, of course, because of the cut and cover tunnel and its effect in reducing noise on Great Worth, including Mr. Hooper's property. That's one of the benefits of that cut and cover tunnel. So unless there's anything else I can assist you with at this stage, those are...
Okay, thank you, Mr. Strawn. Mr. Hooper?
Yes, just briefly. With regard to the plantings, I don't think that myself and my wife are going to see much benefit from those. Okay. Compensation, I mean, there is the need to sell there, but I did mention in the presentation earlier that we're quite happy where we are. We like the village. But nevertheless, our property has been devalued, and we feel it's unreasonable why we should accept that devaluation in our property. And again, 1 year after operation, I believe it's still projected at 2026 for the first year of operation, so we're looking at 2027 before we would even be able to consider, at the very earliest, some sort of compensation.
Is that roughly right?
The scheme has to be in operation for 1 year,
Yeah.
and then there is the ability to claim compensation if it materially affects the value of the property as a result of the scheme.
When in operation.
When in operation.
And is 2026 roughly the right year to be thinking about if things go reasonably well?
Depends on the committee, Peter.
Yes. Well, I'm grateful Mr. Moll's nodding his head to
Yes.
that rather than...
No, we are still,
Yes,
we are
indeed.
still, as Sir Peter says, being optimistic. We are, but I hope also realistic. We are still programming bringing the scheme the railway into operation in 2026. So the first year for claims under that statutory regime would be 2027. Yeah.
Okay. And just briefly on the rights of way, I mean, what we were saying is that the land required to link these footpaths and bridleways would be used by HS2 in constructing the line or on the temporary realignment of the Welsh Lane. Some of them actually just stop at the Welsh Lane now, and just something for the village to get out of this. It would be quite nice if the promoter would help us to link those together and safe crossings over the Welsh Lane once it's reinstated.
I think probably raises a wider issue as to whether it would be appropriate for us to encourage the promoters to use the bill to do things which are normally done by highway authorities and others.
Okay.
So I think you raised a point which we ought to bear in mind. Not that we necessarily will do anything about it, but
Okay.
I think that it's a broader issue as to whether there can be a scheme assessment and see whether changes which highway authorities could talk about and whether government would want us to put into the bill things which would otherwise take longer and be more awkward to do. But as it affects other people's property, it may not be easy to achieve.
Yes, I think that the point is that it was to use the land that was there actually being used at the time. Okay, that's it from me, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you very much, both of
Appreciate
you.
it.
I wish you a safe journey back.
Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution today. Thank you. Right, we now move on to, I think, Sharp Pritchard, who are representing South Bucks District Council and Buckinghamshire County Council. at some point I'm going to break, so you will find you probably won't get all your stuff in one slot. So probably around about 5 o'clock we'll break for about an hour.
Certainly. So, well, we're entirely, of course, in your hands as far as that's concerned. I was just looking around to see whether my parliamentary agent was in the room, and I suspect he's just lurking outside. And so it might be desirable if he came in. So I'm happy to kick off. The reason why I was just pausing for him is because what I wanted to do right at the outset was to give you a very short document which consists really of doing two things. First, it's to say just the 4 things that I'm anxious that the committee should have very much in mind as far as Buckinghamshire and South Bucks are concerned today. And the other is a short document which simply sets out our requests of the committee so that you have that to hand during the course of the evidence which I propose to call before the committee. Because as the committee will be aware, today we're dealing with the Colne Valley, and we're dealing with it only in a limited number of respects, in the sense that there are matters such as noise which are being dealt with generically, and so generally speaking are not part of today's presentation, because the councils have obviously been anxious, both by way of saving their resources and saving your time, not to deal with matters on a duplicated basis. So the 4 important things as far as today are concerned are the importance of and the characteristics of the Colne Valley. Second, in the absence of a tunnel, which is separately and later to be considered, the Colne Valley has to bear a long viaduct which should be designed as such and not merely be part of a procurement process.
Would you mind doing 6135 talk, please?
Of course, sir. This document indicates, of course, the course of HS2 and the position of the proposed viaduct, and so you'll be hearing some more about that in the course of this presentation. So the third matter which I particularly want the committee to have in mind today, given the impact of HS2 on the Colne Valley, is that such requires what I would describe as a clear and full approach to mitigation of that impact. And in particular, you'll hear that it's desirable to have a comprehensive master plan produced so as to provide for the railway to come rather than to be responsive after the railway has been constructed. And so the 4th point to have in mind today is simply this. Certain slip roads are proposed to and from the M25 for the course of construction to take heavy goods vehicles beyond a certain weight to and from the M25. And so it appeared originally that those slip roads were going to be provided for the course of the construction. There's no point in having them but for the construction. But it now appears that they're only to be provided for a part of it, and then, of course, to be taken away. The proper approach, we say, is that those slip roads should be present throughout construction. So what I want to do...
Is that throughout construction and then taken away, or
yes.
throughout construction and then left?
No, throughout construction and taken away, because they're there for a particular purpose, that is to say, to facilitate construction, to avoid the heavy goods vehicles associated with construction going over local roads, and therefore they're recognised as being essential for that purpose. It was indicated to begin with they will be there throughout construction. Now something different is stated. So what I wish to do, sir, if I may, is to call first Mr. Stuart Pomeroy to give an overview of Colne Valley. Then I shall be calling a Dr. Ian Thornhill to deal with ecology requests, Mr. Jerry Unsworth to deal with viaduct design, and Mr. Mike Freestone to deal with traffic, particularly that last point just discussed. And sir, I will be presenting, of course, a short form list of the requests that we make, but they're associated very much with those 4 matters. So I'm, of course, entirely in the committee's hands, but as far as today's presentation is concerned, I'd see no difference at all in terms of presentation between the 2 councils, and I was simply going to run the 2 things consecutively and concurrently.
That would be perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And so, as I've indicated, the first witness I wish to call, therefore, is Mr. Stuart Pomeroy. Thank you very much. So, do you wish the witness to be here or at the witness table?
We're very relaxed. I mean, actually, it's probably easier to sit there, because when you sit there, you get neck ache as you keep turning around.
Very well. Very well. Well, can I ask, therefore, for A10551 to be put on the screens, please? And I'm going to turn that down. Can you see that all?
Yes, thank you.
And I'll first of all ask, whilst that's on the screen, for Mr. Pomeroy to introduce himself, please.
Okay, I've worked in the Colne Valley for over 10 years. My current role is as Colne Valley Team Manager for environmental charity Groundwork, who are the managing agents to the Colne Valley Park Community Interest Company. And Groundwork have been working in the Colne Valley Park for 30 years. I've lived in the Colne Valley, close to where High Speed 2 is due to be built at Wyatt's Covert and in Denham Green. And I'm glad and privileged to have had the opportunity to experience the tranquillity of the Colne Valley so close to London, including Northmoor Hill Wood, Broadwater Lake and the Colne Valley Trail beside the Grand Union Canal. As has been explained, I've been called by South Bucks District Council to give a brief overview of the Colne Valley Park, and this overview is delivered on behalf of Buckinghamshire County Council, the London Borough of Hillingdon, Chiltern District Council, South Bucks District Council, Three Rivers District Council and the Colne Valley Park CIC, who have collaborated to address issues in the Colne Valley across the local planning authorities that are affected.
So if we can move to the next slide, please. And there we see, recorded in comparatively short form, where the Colne Valley is by reference to current features, and on the left-hand side some features about the Colne Valley, both its size, more than 3 million people within 10 miles of it, and the lakes and so forth.
Yes.
Is there anything further to amplify from that slide?
Just to say the scale of the Colne Valley Park, which stretches from Brinkmansworth in the north to Runnymede in the south, covering 43 square miles. Its management is complicated by being on the edge of no less than 10 county, unitary and district councils, those red lines you can see on there. It is nonetheless currently a coherent landscape that transcends local authority boundaries. It's full of attractive landscapes, particularly in the northern part of the park. The Colne Valley Park is seen as a whole. Unfortunately, High Speed 2 has divided the Colne Valley Park into different community forum areas.
And then if we have the next slide, please, this slide 1055 bracket 3. This shows a relationship with London, does it?
Yes, correct. The park is recognised in local authorities' green infrastructure plans and strategies. It serves a strategic role in relation to London, and the example you can see on the slide in the Mayor of London's All London Green Grid, the whole of the park is included within the Colne and Crane area framework, including the parts of the park outside London. This is the largest area outside of London to be included in the London Green Grid. its importance to the capital is recognised. I'd also like to point out that the Colne Valley Park is identified as a strategic green infrastructure project in both Hertfordshire and Buckinghamshire green infrastructure plans and strategies.
Behind you, if you perhaps, Mr. Straker, could run your finger down the Colne Valley on that beige.
On the green grid page, yes.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's the left-hand one that's beige, but if you run your finger down, it'll be clear to those who...
Oh, I beg your pardon, yes, just down there on the left-hand side.
Fine, thank you.
So then if we go, having observed that on the westerly side, the left to the side of London, and go to A10554, please. Here we get to a picture which reveals some of the activities which go on in the course of the Colne Valley, including a quote, I think, from Stephen Springall in 1907, Country Rambles round Uxbridge.
Yes, correct. It shows the long-standing appreciation of the park, and the quote about the Colne Valley as the reviver of hopes and healthfulness for the jaded chap of London from 1907 still applies, even if it might be worded in slightly different terms now.
And so we see in 10555, the next slide, some of those others giving it a slightly more contemporary feel, perhaps. 2 million plus visits each year, 4, and then the list of activities, which doesn't conclude, other than with etc., with some pictures of them both to the left and right of the text.
Yes.
And beyond the extent of the range of activities, is there anything further to be said about that slide?
No, just simply making the point that it's more than just, as you saw in the previous slide, it's more than just the jaded chap of London.
And 10556, please, next slide, gives the area affected by HS2. And what should we draw out from this, please?
I'd just like to take the opportunity to briefly walk you through the part of the Colne Valley that is affected by High Speed 2 and construction sites. So, starting in the west, you've got the Grand Union Canal Circular Walk, an attractive countryside walk, yet that's entirely within the boundaries of London. Takes in a long circuit from the canal through Bayhurst Wood and across farmland. Moving on, we have the Hillingdon Outdoor Activities Centre, which is used by 22,000 young people each year. And adjacent to that, Denham Quarry, a former quarry, now a resource for wildlife, well used by anglers, huge potential as a recreation resource for residents of South Harefield and beyond.
And can you just point to that on the plan, please?
Just there. And then the red dotted line immediately adjacent to that marks the route of the Colne Valley Trail, and which also shares the route with the London Loop and the National Cycle Network. And the unexpected tranquility of this area so close to London cannot be overstated. As an example, as part of the work on the London Green Grid, I took representatives of the Greater London Authority on a cycle ride from West Drayton to Harefield. They were amazed that we stayed entirely within London, entirely off-road and relatively quiet. They were stunned when we came across a High Speed 2 crosses here sign, which, as far as they were concerned, was in the middle of the countryside. Due to time constraints, this is the type of thing that the HS2 Select Committee was unable to experience on their road trip around the Colne Valley. However, this is the way that local people and visitors experience the Colne Valley Park. Moving on, and immediately adjacent to that, have the Grand Union Canal, including Denham Marina, which is part of the Widewater Lock Conservation Area, well used by boaters, walkers and cyclists along the towpath. This Grand Union Canal towpath and the canal is an important connecting spine as part of the network of rights of way and paths in the Colne Valley. And then moving up the line, there are Savay Lake, Corder Lake, Harefield Lake, which are well used by anglers. Savay Lake in particular is of national renown in carp fishing circles.
We've done quite a bit on
yes.
those ones.
And Broadwater Lake, I'm sure you've heard of. as well. But just to point out another tranquil place, I remember going there to experience the eclipse. I think not the last one, the one before that, 99, something like that. And I remember the sky going dark, bird-like bursting into song, not another sound to be heard except the flow of the River Colne. But again, because it's at least half a mile to a mile off the road, it was unable to be experienced by the select committee. Denham Water Ski Club, people come here for water skiing and open air swimming because of its good connections to where they live and its tranquility. And then immediately adjacent to that, you have Northmoor Hill Wood, attractive ancient woodland. People who grow up in Denham Green in the 70s and 80s talk fondly of childhood memories here. And you will hear when the Colne Valley CIC presents evidence later that they've recently taken on management of the woods to restore them for the benefit of wildlife and people. You then come to the Old Shire Lane area, historic trackway, and the Old Shire Lane circular walk along the natural contours of the landscape reveals far-reaching and attractive views over productive farmland towards the green Colne Valley. And conversely, there are views from the other side of the valley back across to what is going to be the huge construction site.
Well, if we just pause there, because I suspect the committee will have had a fair idea of the range of activities capable of being undertaken here. We see also reproduced on this slide, don't we, a visitor guide book or booklet for the Colne Valley. That booklet is available, across London?
It's available locally around the Colne Valley, local libraries from Colne Valley Park Visitor Centre and other information sheets. It's providing information on the Colne Valley Park as that first taste of countryside to the west of London, countryside on your doorstep, as you can see on the booklet.
Thank you. Well, let's leave that plan and go to 10557, please. When you ask and answer, do you the question, what's going to happen here?
Yes. Although it's only a few kilometres out of, I believe, 230 kilometres of the route, the construction impacts between the Northolt and the Chilterns tunnels are some of the most concentrated on the whole line and will be continuous for many years. You can see some of the impacts indicated on the slide, so I won't necessarily go and read all those out. That's construction. You then have permanent impacts, which are dominated by one of the largest overground structures on the whole route, a 3.4 kilometre long viaduct. There are also electricity substations and other buildings proposed, including the relocation of Heathrow Express depot to Langley, which is also within the Colne Valley Regional Park.
Then if we go over the page, please, the pressure on the Colne Valley can be seen, A10558.
So the consequences of this construction for the Colne Valley are severe. There's land blighting effects of the Heathrow Spur provision, the large-scale obliteration of productive land, that's farmland, formal recreation facilities such as Hoac and Denham Water Ski Club, fishing lakes, and informal recreation lost through the severance of rights of way during construction. There's the impact on Broadwater Lake Nature Reserve and the wildlife networks, the loss of tranquility in the northern section of the park as it is experienced by local people. High Speed 2 claims short-term impacts on recreation facilities, but up to 10 years of construction and 5 years of restoration means we've lost a generation. The reality is we believe that once users are prevented or discouraged from using and visiting that part of the Colne Valley Park, it's unlikely they'll want to come back. We also contend that the park and its recreation facilities will suffer not just physical but also reputational damage, the perception that it's not worth going and that might stick.
Thank you. And then finally, please, A10559. In this slide, you ask and answer the question, how can this be addressed?
Yes. The Colne Valley Park's value is an integral entity. A meaningful greenbelt will be severely compromised unless the impacts that have been described are addressed. Asks that are going to follow not just from South Bucks and Bucks but from the Colne Valley CIC and Hillingdon and others in future weeks. Asks are going to include a tunnel, abandonment of the Heathrow Spur, international design competition for high quality viaduct, a landscape master plan, and mitigation and compensation for the benefit of local landscapes, local residents and the countryside attractions that's commensurate with the severity of impacts. In summary, we would ask that the scale, history, importance and potential of the Colne Valley Park should be considered in the petitions that follow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pomeroy. So that concludes what I wanted to ask Mr. Pomeroy by way of examination in chief.
Okay, who's speaking for the project? Mr. Mould.
All I wanted to ask Mr. Pomeroy, if I may, was really this. You'll know, Mr. Pomeroy, that yourself and the local authorities with whom you appear today and the project have been meeting with each other in recent weeks, have they not, with a view to finding common cause on a coherent and joined-up approach to the project and its design and construction within as it passes through the Colne Valley.
Yes, you'll hear later a call for a landscape master plan.
Yes, but those discussions have been taking place. I wonder if we can just put up P6171, number 7, and just point to a stage in those negotiations. We've moved on a little further since this stage, but there we are, a set of assurances that the project put to yourselves and the councils on the 29th of last month. Say there's been a further letter today, I think, to build on those assurances in the light of comments we've had back, helpful comments we've had back from yourselves and the councils in response to these. But just so the committee gets a flavour at the outset of what it is that we've been seeking to do. First of all...
Is this a if-no-tunnel approach?
Indeed, sir, yes. Everything today, I think, is on that basis, yes. Firstly, under the heading Ongoing Engagement on Design, a proposal that there should be established a Colne Valley panel, the membership of which would be as set out in paragraph 4 on that page, you see. And that would be a body that would engage in a collaborative approach to the review of and discussion of mitigation and restoration schemes for the railway as it passes through the Colne Valley Park. In other words, in seeking to ensure that through the detailed design of the railway under the powers that the committee is familiar with, the project as it passes through the Colne Valley responds as effectively as it may to the landscape in which it is going to be situated. Is that fair?
You'll hear more about the landscape master plan asked when the Colne Valley Park CIC appears later on today. Some, without going into too much detail, some of the assurances are helpful, for instance, the Colne Valley panel, but the content, and we want to make sure that this panel is not just simply reacting to proposals that are being put by High Speed 2, but that local input is being used, local knowledge is being retained from those local authorities and groups such as CIC that operate in the Colne Valley Park, so that more imaginative and locally beneficial solutions can be provided for the park.
So you think we're helped by the middle section of what we're seeing at the moment, where it says the nominated undertaker will be required to have regard to landscape proposals brought forward jointly by the relevant local planning authorities, which I think is brings the two things together. And it'd be ludicrous if it didn't consider what the promoters were doing. It'd be pointless if it didn't consider what the county council and the local authorities and the others would be putting forward. So I think we've got a picture that it's not just what the promoters do.
Yes, I think it's about both. If this is going to work, if we have got High Speed 2 imposed on the Colne Valley, it's about working with High Speed 2 to try and use our local knowledge to come up with the best solutions for that.
So you can initiate as well as react?
Yes, we would hope there is a means in there that, we would like the request for a master plan ask, as highlighted there, to be expanded a little more so that there is a means for us to be proactive in putting forward worked up and consented proposals to High Speed 2 as an alternative to some of the things that are already in the environmental statement.
But for this committee, this week, we've got much more to hear, There's no particular issue about the chairmanship being with the promoters, and there's no particular issue about, it's not detailed design particularly, it's trying to get the master plan so things fit in and have the best gain and least impact, least detriment to the local area.
Yes, our overriding principles are to reduce impact and to compensate for that impact on the local area.
And indeed, just picking up on Peter's point, we've subsequently indicated that we would the chair of the Colne Valley panel should be an independent person, haven't we?
So that's going on beyond.
Yes, indeed. Yes, and it's fine. It's also just to reinforce the points Peter makes, if you'll forgive me. We've made clear, haven't we, that we're not so much interested in labels. We're more interested in the substance of this, which is there should be precisely that two-way approach. We should not be looking to make all the running. We should be reacting to the local to proposals put forward with the basis of that very local knowledge that you have just mentioned, so that there is a genuine collaborative approach which will be reflected in the detailed design of the project. That's fair, isn't it?
I think subject to the further detail that goes into there was an update to that assurance circulated this morning that I must admit I haven't had a chance to look at.
So, perhaps the question for the committee is, or perhaps the question for you is at this stage, given that there is an ongoing and apparently a constructive dialogue between, it's not just a dialogue actually, it involves yourselves and the council as well. What more the committee can do other than to say continue to try and make progress in that respect?
I suspect that the requests may come with the next section.
Indeed, I'm just trying to get a sense of where the issue is, which issues may be today. Just finally, then, just to complete the little survey of this helpful document from the committee's perspective. The next paragraph, the next subheading is landscape principles, and this reflects the fact that both parties have been working up a series of landscape principles independently of each other that they would regard as setting a methodology for planning a landscape, a properly responsive approach to the landscape, the character and appearance of the landscape through this area when the detailed design of the scheme is prepared. That's a common objective, isn't it? That there should be a responsive approach to landscape rather than a failure properly to respond to landscape.
I think in terms of the wording that's in there, we would like to see that expanded a little more to reflect the landscape, to reflect landscape's function and its use, to ensure it has a viable use. It's not simply about landscaping.
6178 brackets 8.
There it is. That's what I put to you. Just the principle, I think, is not an issue, is it? The detail, as always, requires a little thinking through.
I think we've got to a point, and I think that if further conversations take place and people become happier, even better.
Pushing my luck a little further, the fourth point is just worth just glancing at, because that deals with, particularly with the question of restoration, which I know the committee has heard some petitioners on before. And again, we're looking to identify a process whereby, again, a collaborative approach taken to making sure that the restoration of lands which are inescapably disturbed in order for the railway to be constructed through this area, of course always assuming that we don't tunnel, well, the restoration of those lands should also be dealt with on a responsive and collaborative approach. Again, the principle is...
Is it a single landowner or is it a generic expression for perhaps more than one?
It would be more than one, yes. If you remember, you heard, for example, from Mrs. Duckfield before the election. But again, just to set the scene, the principle of that approach to restoration of the areas of land, some of which would be quite extensive through this area, which will be disturbed to enable the railway to be constructed, that's a matter on which I think we those of us who are in the room today agree, isn't it?
For that particular site, that approach would work. Again, we would request that the whole of the Colne Valley is the whole of the area affected by High Speed 2 at the Colne Valley, that we don't just stick to the hybrid bill area. And again, you'll hear more about this when the Colne Valley Park CIC presents. But in terms of restoration of that site, Again, subject to detail, the basic principle may be sound.
I don't think you're asking though to ask us to expand the bill limits, are you, for that purpose? No. Okay.
But to take a more creative approach.
Would you allow me a bit of verbiage? In that paragraph 1, in the third line, there's the word "to be agreed." Agreed by whom?
It would be by the. I'll check this, but from memory, it's by the qualifying local authority and the promoter. But I will just. If we can just get the bill, and I'll just check that point.
Just one more general point. If this is right for this portal, is it right for other portals elsewhere along the line? Or some similar form of words?
There should. I think, in principle, yes. The project is expecting that before it brings forward its detailed proposals for agreement and approval in relation to restoring land which has been disturbed for the project, that it would have engaged in, prior to submission of those matters for approval, it would have engaged in discussion with the landowners or landowners concerned, but also with the authority that would be involved in the decision.
Could I ask you, Mr. Pomeroy? I mean, I agree it's a special area and very quiet, and actually you don't expect to find it where you find it. But when I also look at the maps, I see rail lines, underground lines, motorways and roads running over the system. In fact, if you overlaid one of the busiest transport corridors and a very special area, they pretty much coexist at the moment. I wouldn't have thought it beyond the wit of man that we could get probably one more railway over there in a way in which we can maintain its special character. Or under there.
I think part of the big issue that the Colne Valley Park is facing at the moment is the sheer number and scale of large development proposals, which I realise is beyond the remit of this select committee. But it's the cumulative impact of these proposals that we're particularly interested in addressing in whatever way we can. Yes, there has been development absorbed by the Colne Valley Park in the past, but it is still a special place, and we want to see if we can retain it as that.
Yes. Any further?
I don't wish to re-examine it at all, sir, especially given that Mr. Lewis wasn't here when I started because he was being passed certain further documents on this very topic. So I don't re-examine at all. I would ask that now I have distributed that short note which I said, which I've spoken to already, together with the summary of requests that we're making of the select committee. So if that can be passed around, I'd be very grateful. And then what I would like to do is to move on to my second witness, Dr. Ian Thornhill.
Okay.
You'll see on the short list of requests that the Colne Valley Master Plan features as number 2, and it may not be a surprise to the committee to see that one aspect there which touches upon how people have viewed this matter in particular is funding. And what I'd be grateful for, please, is I now call Mr. Thornhill, but I'm going to ask him to forbear from dealing with any question of ancient woodland because that is being discussed outside as we speak. So in the interest of progress, I'm going to ask him to introduce himself to the committee, to ask that A1056 brackets 1 is put on the screen, and I'm going to skip over anything to do with woodland. So if we can have A10561, please. And if Dr. Thornhill can introduce himself, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. Yes, my name's Ian Thornhill. I'm the sole ecology advisor at Buckinghamshire County Council, and I also service South Buckinghamshire District and Chiltern District Councils in the same manner.
Thank you very much. And if we can go straight, please, to 10562, and I'm going to take this slide, sir, with your leave, quickly, because I think, Dr. Thornhill, what it describes, isn't it, is a series of meetings or correspondence which occurred starting with, I'll put it this way, us sending material to HS2 on the 13th of June 2014 and ending with some comeback from HS2 considerably later.
Yeah, the simple point here is that I've only had one meeting with HS2 Limited ecologists to date, but also just to add to that table that we did have one last bilateral meeting on the 2nd of June last week to focus specifically on Colne Valley points.
And then if we go to 10563, please, here we see, do we, just an extract from what Parliament has required of public bodies.
Yes, quite right. I'd just like to highlight the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act of 2006, through which Parliament has said that every public authority must, in exercising its functions, have regard, so far as is consistent with the proper exercise of those functions, to the purpose of conserving biodiversity. The NERC Act was established with the intention to help ensure that biodiversity becomes an integral consideration in the development of policies and that decisions of public bodies work with nature and not against it. It's under this duty that I operate on a daily basis, and which extends to HS2 Limited. The conservation of biodiversity includes in relation to a living organism or type of habitat, restoring or enhancing a population or habitat.
And then if we could have 10564, please, where we see a picture of that which is proposed.
Yeah.
And your comment, please, at this stage to help the committee.
Sure. Today I'm here to discuss the implications of the proposal to ecology within the Colne Valley. The Select Committee will have already heard from Ms Davis of the Hearts of Middlesex Wildlife Trust on the 23rd of March regarding the Broadwater Lake Nature Reserve, which is an integral part of the Mid-Colne Valley SSI, which is within this area. And you've obviously just heard Mr Pomeroy give an overview of the Colne Valley Regional Park. I'll try not to duplicate too much background information with that in mind, but just some pertinent contextual stuff looking at this slide. So from a bird's eye view, you can clearly see that the Colne Valley's core is a series of wetlands that run north to south, that link the southwest London water bodies special protection area to the south, and a further complex of water bodies to the north. It's the first notable area of open countryside west of London, and thus serves as a strategic area of green infrastructure for the capital and an important area for the health and well-being of those that live there. For reference, you can see front right the Hillingdon Outdoors Activity Centre. You can see the projected route with viaduct cutting through several of the lakes within the Colne Valley, and the Chiltern Tunnel south, top centre left. Quite right, yes.
Then if we leave that slide, please, to go to 10565, where I think you've listed, have you, a number of designations or features within the Colne Valley Regional Park.
Well, these are those designations that are at least partly within or immediately adjacent to the bill limits. There's considerably wider variety of statutory and non-statutory designations within the Colne Valley Regional Park. But just to note that there are 2 sites of special scientific interest, which includes the Mid-Colne Valley SSI, which I'm going to come back to. 11 sites of county value for wildlife. These are non-statutory sites that receive planning through the receive protection through the planning system. And at least 5 ancient woodlands and several areas of priority habitat, which are those listed of habitats of principal importance under Section 40 of the NERC Act.
Thank you. If we can go to 10566, please, which shows diagrammatically something of what you've just been talking about, and sometimes it can be quite difficult to pick out precisely what feature lies where. but we've got marked upon there the bill limits in pink.
Yep.
The ancient woodland hatched.
Yep.
Sites of special scientific interest diagonal. County wildlife sites green. Colne Valley Park, a sort of light yellow, and the county boundary, a black border.
Yep, quite right. Just to outline it spatially for you, particularly in context of the bill limits. Just like to point out, just in the sort of wider environs there, the number of county value wildlife sites, each of which support a complex of habitats. So whilst in the centre of this diagram you do have the triple SI, it's important to consider that as a key component of a wider ecological network.
Well then, if we go to 10567, please, where you've identified route-wide issues,
yep.
And bear in mind what I said about ancient woodland for the moment, if you could just take us quickly through those.
Sure. I don't intend on spending too much time here. It's just simply to raise that there are relevant route-wide issues that touch upon the Colne Valley, many of which you'll have heard from Mr Jackson of the Wildlife Trusts previously. They're also covered at greater length in our response to the ES. I'd just like to note that we are yet to receive an addendum to the ES, which will deliver the results of some necessary surveys which have not yet been incorporated into it. So we're at something of a disadvantage in carrying out an assessment of the adequacy of the ES until we've received those survey results, which we are expecting soon.
Now those were route-wide issues. 568, please, 10568 for specific issues.
Yep. So the first point I'll fast forward through as we've discussed. The other 2 points are the construction impacts to qualifying features of the Mid-Colne Valley Triple SI and those ecologically linked habitats, some of which fall outside of that designation. And thirdly on there, how a proper application of the biodiversity offsetting metric could be used to inform an appropriate mitigation and compensation package for the local area, which at present is likely to suffer a biodiversity loss.
And then if we go to 10569, please, that's some other issues.
Yes, some other issues that, again, I won't go into any depth on here. In fact, they're being brought to you by other bodies. Just in relation to potential impacts to water quality within the Colne, the River Colne, impacts to regionally significant populations of Dorbenton's bats, loss of habitat for farmland birds, and impacts to Denham Country Park, which I think will be returned to a later date.
Yes, a later date for that one. Can I then ask you please to go to 105.6.14, which skips over the woodland points and gets to the Mid-Colne Valley Site of Special Scientific Interest.
Yep, so to my second point, with particular reference to the wintering bird populations here, and we can just move straight on
to side 15, 105.6.15, please.
Okay, so before you use an extract from the Triple SI citation for the Mid-Colne Valley, which, as you can see, has a particular focus on its wintering bird assemblage. Although it does also note other linked terrestrial habitats. Significantly, there are 70 to 80 species of wintering bird that are regularly recorded within the Triple SI, though it highlights 3 species in particular that at any one time can reach populations of national importance, being the tufted duck, pochard and shoveler.
And 105.6.16 shows those birds to which you've just referred.
Yep.
We get 105.6.16, please.
Yep.
And that's really for the purpose, I suspect, is it, of turning straight on to 105.6.17, having identified those particular birds. 105.6.17, please.
Okay. So, for some national context, the United Kingdom has been a historical stronghold for wintering water birds due to its position within northwest Europe. And in 2014, the RSPB published a report on the state of the UK bird populations. That's the front cover of the picture there. many of which are represented within the Colne Valley and have been in decline since 2001. Indeed, it notes that 32 from 48 of overwintering waterbird populations have been in decline since 2001. That's approximately 2/3. And for our 3 species of concern formerly highlighted, 2 have been in marginal decline over the last 10 years or so, in fact. But particularly pochard has been in significant long-term decline. So we do feel that the status of the Mid-Colne Valley triplocyte should just be emphasised somewhat.
Then the next slide, 105618, please.
Thank you. So this slide just for orientation for the next few slides. In particular, if you note Broadwater Lake in the centre, managed by the Herts Middlesex Wildlife Trust, which is central to this complex. Also note from front right, Hoveringham's, Savay, Corder, Harefield Lakes and Long Pond, all of which are in part within or immediately adjacent to the bill limits, and also Broadwater, Harefield, Corder, as well as Long Pond, which do form a part of the triplocyte. Sure.
Wildfowl. Which of these lakes accommodate other types of activity that might be harmful to wildfowl? For example, water skiing. Sailing obviously wouldn't have too much impact on migratory wildfowl, but water skiing would. Which is the water skiing lake here? Is it?
Well, okay. So we have the Outdoors Activity Centre is Hoveringham. That's bottom right.
Yes.
Other activities that do cause disturbance and have been recorded to cause disturbance are indeed sailing, and there's some of that in the north of the Broadwater Lake, and the large amount of angling that occurs around the edges of many of these lakes.
Is it your view that most wildfowl kind of basically coexist alongside sailing, but water skiing would be more detrimental because of the waves it creates and the level of disturbance?
If you were to consider those two directly, then yes, I'm sure water skiing would have a greater impact. Sailing does also have its own impact too.
And how do you ensure that the two coexist? The overwintering wildfowl plus the leisure uses.
Well, actually, I'll come to something that will answer that question in the next few slides. But there is a refuge area here which is pivotal to the whole complex, really, which is at the south of that Broadwater Lake, adjacent, very close to that construction boundary there, and that refuge ameliorates some of those impacts.
Maybe anticipating a future response from you, but maybe you could be just thinking in terms of giving the committee some explanation in a moment of your view of the impact of the actual, let's put the construction to one side because that will be a temporary phenomenon. But once HS2, if it goes ahead, is in place, the impact that would have on migratory wildfowl, and whether there are examples from other parts of the world where there has been an adverse impact, like a significant decline in this type of flora and fauna.
The operational impact will be less than the construction. We've seen Natural England and the RSPB come forward with their opinions on that. The construction impacts are those of which I have most concern over, which are not so easy to mitigate for, and that could, the construction plus the period of a sort of unknown period of habituation for these birds are the key periods of concern.
So just if I may, anticipating something which will come forward through Mr. Unsworth, at A105717, reference is made by that witness, or will be made by that witness, to the Colne Valley environment and noise, particularly referable to water skiing, and the controls which are put in place in connection with water skiing so as to minimise any adverse effect that there might otherwise be on birds. So with that diversion, I was going to go back, if I may, to 1056 19 rather than 18. 18 is the one which identifies various lakes. 19, we then see the refuge area that was spoken to a few moments ago.
And I think that more or less covered that slide really. It's just to say the refuge area is essentially comprised of a series of mature and vegetated islands, and that's what provides that refuge. So I think we can go straight to
Number 20.
The refuge area, I know we did discuss this on our visit, that there's no boating of any kind allowed in the refuge area.
Not within the refuge area, I believe.
And are punters allowed to walk around the outside? Are they able to? Because presumably bird watchers are welcome.
I would refer to Mr. Pomeroy on that. I'm not exactly sure how birders use the lake around here. I believe there are some hides nearby, so there will be some. There are some footpaths around there.
The committee may recall when we heard from the Wildlife Trust, they mentioned that they've got a hide on the southwestern edge of the lake that they mentioned to you when they appeared in March.
Okay.
Slide 20 gives some more particulars, doesn't it, of the refuge area on the left-hand side at any rate.
Yes, this just refers to the original report that really sort of identified this refuge area. And it's split into three that are noted as C, D and E there. And I think it's particularly the area E that we're concerned with here, which, whilst being approximately within 100 metres of the centre of the line, it's closer to the construction boundary, to around about roughly 50 metres or so from the construction boundary limits.
Very well, let's go to 105621, which once again shows the refuge area. 105621, please.
And, well, it is really what we talked about. So within those reports just identified, it sort of highlights the pivotal importance of this refuge area. These orange arrows indicate the main movements of water birds from other water bodies, both within and outside of the SSI, and that green arrow indicates movement within Broadwater Lake from the north during times of sailing. So you can really see the importance of Broadwater as a refuge from disturbance that already occurs within the lake. So these arrows broadly represent those ecological linkages that I spoke about. And which will lead me on to the next slide. I'd just like to acknowledge that the ES does acknowledge that in the absence of mitigation, the combined effects of woodland and wetland loss will lead to a decrease in numbers of breeding birds that will result in a permanent adverse impact on the integrity of the Mid-Colne Valley SSI that will be significant at the national level. Following that, there is then a list of both incidental and proactive mitigation measures and assumptions.
And it's to those I think you come next. 105622, please. This is part of the mitigation assumptions made by HS2. You've already referred to what happens absent any mitigation, the harm which is caused. And the observation you seek to make here is?
So, of those assumptions that were specifically outlined within the ES, it is stated that the refuge area will continue to protect birds from disturbance as it will remain undisturbed. Though, and if we could go to the next slide actually.
23.
In the preceding bullet point, it's stated how the southwestern corner of the lake will be disturbed during construction. So that area E. This is bullet points preceding each other. So on those, albeit there are other assumptions in there, it would appear that the ES supports the notion on these 2 points that there is a critical refuge area which will continue to be disturbed during construction. And in any event, feel that during the period of construction and for an ill-defined period thereafter, whilst birds habituate to the passing of a high-speed train, that Broadwater Lake will not have a fully functioning refuge area to the detriment of those species for which the Mid-Colne Valley SSI has been designated, as well as a diverse array of other wetland bird species that are regularly recorded. Indeed, as a residual impact, it is acknowledged by HS2 Limited that there will be the loss of one of only 2 locations used by pochard for breeding as a residual impact, and pochard being one of those bird species that was noted on the SSI notice.
Very well, then 24, please. 105624. This is a further extract from the report. Referable to this matter.
Yes. To the north of Broadwater, there is 3 lakes, Troy, Pinesfield and Linsters, and it's stated in the report that these will remain unaffected. And whilst that may be true, I'm not entirely convinced of this point's relevance. If we just go to the next slide, please.
25, 105625.
Appreciate these are not the best quality of pictures. However, you can see that the two complexes, Broadwater Lake and those 3 lakes, are not directly comparable for habitat. Note that Broadwater Lake at the top, particularly in the refuge area, has a good deal of habitat complexity with a number of islands which offer protection from predators and disturbance, and a varying lake profile offering a range of feeding opportunities. And by comparison, on the bottom there, Troy, Pinesfield, Linsters are smaller enclosed lakes with a more uniform depth, few islands, and are more heavily fished and thus disturbed. And they don't represent like-for-like replacements. And in the evidence or exhibit, in fact, provided to us by HS2 Limited, BCV_03G, they have actually acknowledged the suboptimal nature of the habitat available in these lakes in a report regarding other potentially displaced wildfowl such as gadwall. I can just take a little time to go into a regularly encountered development control analogy. If there's a population of protected species present, it may be necessary to translocate that species to a suitable receptor site. I'm not suggesting we translocate the birds, incidentally. But this would only be undertaken if the receptor site is at least marginally suitable for the species concerned, and more importantly, is capable of being improved in order to increase the carrying capacity for these species. Thus, it is commonly accepted best practice to ensure that you have appropriately increased the carrying capacity of the receptor site in order to receive those displaced animals. And I don't feel that enough measures have been identified by HS2 Limited to ensure that this will be the case.
So there you're speaking of a lack of carrying capacity. And if we go to 105626, please, do we see the request which is made in relation to the Mid-Colne Valley SSSI?
Yes. So we'd ask that there are additional mitigation measures sought in collaboration with local stakeholders, such as those that have a working knowledge of the area, to provide genuine mitigation for at least the period of construction and a period of operation which would demonstrate a clear application of the precautionary approach by which HS2 Limited claim to operate. We've heard the assurance offered to Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, which I don't feel quite goes far enough. Regarding that, it's quite right that they should be consulted on the detail of mitigation measures. However, it's apparent that in order to provide appropriate levels of mitigation, additional provisions will be required, which is a point of principle prior to detail.
Thank you very much. And whilst we're on this slide and this request, please, it may be inquired of you about Natural England and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds as to their particular positions that they've adopted in relation to HS2. Is there any comment you wish to make there?
Yes. If I could start with the RSPB comments. So these were exhibits provided to us from HS2 Limited. So this is the exhibit, in fact, I don't have a title, but
tell me what you want, I'll find it for you.
Sure, it's the letter dated 23rd of April from Mr. Wilkinson of the RSPB.
P6118. 6118.
That's actually the... So I have a letter here from the RSPB, which was sent to us belatedly.
Well, let's just identify for the committee the substance of the point which is being made by the RSPB.
It's them confirming their acceptance of this letter that you see before you, essentially. But I'd like to point out that in relation to the... That's the one there. In relation to the Mid-Colne Valley point, the RSPB's Mid-Colne Valley petitioning point, which is point 18, the letter from HS2 Limited sent to the RSPB, the former one in fact actually now, doesn't actually refer to that petitioning point. So they're using it as context, but I should overall point out that of course the RSPB are a national charity and are more concerned with points of principle across the route and are not so likely to be engaged fully with local site-by-site issues. But I think the evidence which has been mostly referred to are the ones associated with the South West London Water Bodies SPA and Ramsar sites. That's exhibits BCV 03G and F. And these two pieces of evidence are actually for quite a different purpose. They're actually looking at two species that use the South West London Water Bodies SPA, gadwall and shoveler, and whether there's sufficient disturbance likely to be caused by HS2 on these qualifying features of the SPA. And that letter now before you actually confirms Natural England's satisfaction to that end. But that is not necessarily key to impacts to the SSSI. That is a need for an appropriate assessment for the South West London Water Bodies SPA. So the survey information in there, its scope, is very much directed at those two species that are not those that we're focused on here. Also, that survey, and this is pointed out both within the methodology as a limitation of the survey and also by Natural England on the scope, that it's not a survey that's been undertaken throughout the appropriate period to get a real feel for the amount of disturbance within the SSSI. In fact, it's roughly half of what was intended in the first place. So I remain, well, in disagreement ultimately with those conclusions from Natural England and the RSPB, though I would just also like to point out that the Natural England letter is a subjective agreement that is subject to the appropriate amount of compensation. I've got to find that one now.
Well, I think we can probably leave that there, that point, because then we can take the matter on, please, to 105627, where we move to your third point, which is dealing with the question of the significant biodiversity net loss. Okay. And there you, in that slide, you're flagging up the point.
Yes, that we seem to be heading within the Colne Valley to a significant biodiversity net loss.
And then if we can take then the next one, simply indicates what one ought to be doing, does it? More, bigger, better and joined habitats. And then through to 29, 105629, where we can see diagrammatically produced certain habitats which are shown in that patchwork or quilt through which HS2 travels.
Point. I don't expect you to know the codes of the habitats here. Literally just pointing out that this area is a complex mosaic of different habitats, and this is HS2 Limited's own survey data, which was provided to us in a digital form. Some of these are of notable ecological value, some not so much. And this data is available in January 2014. This enables us to undertake the first habitat loss stage of the biodiversity offsetting calculation, which is this point, really.
And then, please, 105630. Does this represent numerically what has been lost within the bill limits and what is sought to be put by way of replacement or gain?
In the absence of a full calculation, this is difficult, but using the former data, pulling out those habitats within the bill limits that are of notable ecological value, produces that table on the left, using the assumption that all habitat within the bill limits is to be lost. The difficult part, in the absence of a clear demonstration of habitat loss and gain, is in generating the second table on the right-hand side. The figures I've used there are just those that are quoted within the ES, within the mitigation areas. So broadly, it would seem that there is a 2-for-1 loss of notable of habitat of notable ecological value. Readily acknowledge that this is a crude measure of losses and gains, and that the biodiversity offsetting methodology requires a number of multipliers to be factored in. Nevertheless, it gives cause for alarm, particularly in light of a recent bilateral meeting with HS2, where we were told that the latest iteration of the offsetting metric suggested a route-wide positive outcome, which would suggest a net gain for biodiversity. Now, we haven't seen that calculation, but if that is the case, then, and if these figures are even broadly correct, then we can assume that the route-wide calculation, in showing a positive result, would indicate that the Colne Valley will secure a net loss. And if I may just stay on this point for just a moment. The wider message here is that for development of this size, a proper use of the offsetting metric could genuinely aid a transparent discussion and empower local organisations to seek or offer land for offsets if indeed they are required. As has been brought to you previously by Mr Jackson of the Wildlife Trusts, the current approach adopted by HS2 Limited, which significantly deviates from the DEFRA guidance on the offsetting process, would seek to produce the metrics as late as possible in the process as more of a rubber stamp exercise on how close they've come to demonstrating no net loss in biodiversity, which I believe conflicts with their own methodology, which states that in line with government policy, HS2 Limited is seeking to ensure that the proposed scheme results in no net loss in biodiversity. A modified version of the DEFRA offsetting pilot methodology will be utilised to compare habitats present pre and post construction, and this is the important bit, and inform the level of compensation provision required to achieve this goal. The process adopted at the present time is not a transparent, iterative process which is shared with fellow professionals that will be used to inform suitable compensation, therefore. So staying with the Colne Valley then, there would then remain an issue over fairness. It would be unfair, for example, to see a habitat lost within the Colne Valley compensated in Warwickshire or vice versa. It would be fair and reasonable for at least the mainstay of habitat loss to be offset within the same locality for wildlife and people alike. And given the context of the Colne Valley Park, the direct impact upon important wildlife designations and the importance of the park for the populations of West London, the case for local offsets would appear strong. By strictly confining themselves to the bill limits, HS2 Limited severely compromise their ability to offset in this manner, in the same way as they do for mitigation of impacts to the Mid-Colne Valley SSI wildfowl. And indeed, the Environmental Audit Committee did recommend to the government that whilst there is a rationale for providing biodiversity compensation along the route, the requirement for biodiversity compensation to be provided directly alongside the HS2 route may lead to missed opportunities for better offsetting measures. That was conclusion 5. And that the government take explicit account of local communities' well-being and that's recommendation 10, to which access to nature clearly contributes. So it should be entirely feasible for HS2 Limited to produce a calculation at a local level, be that within a community forum area or within landscapes of heightened ecological importance, which I would suggest the Colne Valley Park is one. So we'd ask then, on summary to that point, that HS2 Limited progress from providing ecological mitigation or compensation across the entire route and demonstrates at least no net loss on a more local level. And in conjunction with this, they should more actively consider providing offset outside of the bill limits in collaboration with local stakeholders who will be able to provide local expertise and ensure that the plan provides, which it absolutely can, a deal that is fair for biodiversity, landscape, local communities and landowners alike.
Thank you. Well, then we can go, please, to see the summary of the requests, please. Next slide, 105631. The first refers to ancient woodlands. The second to the integrated landscape master plan, to which reference has already been made, with a demonstration of at least no net loss in biodiversity. The third for the wildfowl populations and ecologically linked features, additional mitigation. Compensatory habitat outside the bill limits, that's the point just touched on, and a monitoring programme number 5. Is there anything else from those slides that one should pick up at this stage?
No, I'm quite happy with those.
And then if we go to the slide 33, please. I suspect we can take this one quite quickly in the light card with the discussion that's already occurred.
I think my main point here is that in securing suitable mitigational measures for impacts to the biodiversity interests in this area, clearly that would need to be incorporated into a master plan if one was forthcoming. And there are competing interests in there, so they would need to be balanced accordingly.
Very well. And then if we look at 105634, just to carry the story forward, which just indicates a landscape-led approach to HS2.
That's fine.
And that's very well. And then we can stop there, and that would then conclude Dr. Thornhill's examination in chief. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, I don't know how you want to play this. I mean, I can provide our response briefly to those points, and then Dr. Thornhill, if he has anything to say in response, or I can put questions to him. But experience suggests that perhaps it'd be good if I did the former rather than the latter, and it's up to you, really, how you'd like me to deal with it.
Let's put a few questions.
All right, okay. Dr. Thornhill, just stepping back a bit from some of the detail, we have a bill before Parliament which proposes a series of works which are described in the environmental statement which seek to mitigate the impacts of the construction and operation of the railway on important features of nature conservation, wildlife interest, ecology that are encountered along the route. That's right, isn't it? And you will have seen that the bill seeks to deal with that by identifying where it has that effect, proposes works which will remedy it, and then makes provision for those works within bill limits, within the land that is taken for the bill. You've seen that. Yeah. Now, if there's a need for, one can take a view as to whether the project has identified its impacts correctly or fully. One can take a view as to whether, having done so, the project has made sufficient provision to remedy those impacts within the limits of the bill. And if one takes the view that the project has failed to do so, then it's incumbent upon those who come before the committee to say specifically where there has been a failure and how the committee, what the committee should require the bill to incorporate in order to remedy it. That's the way it works, isn't it? You come to the committee and say the bill ought to include a remedy for this impact, and the way to remedy it is to include the following some land should be included for further planting, or some land should be included to create a wildlife hide, or whatever it may be. That's the way it works, isn't it?
Is there a question?
Yes, it is. That's why I say, isn't it? It's
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't think you've identified any specific area of land or any specific work, any specific piece of mitigation that you want the committee to
understanding that because the bill limits, if the promoters have been able to replace taken land hectare for hectare, it would have happened. And the question is whether something outside can come in, and if it did, would that need an additional provision? And we've sort of got the sort of point of...
Well, what I'm trying to get at is, I'm trying just to elicit whether there is actually there is a shopping list here of particular things that the petitioner wants to be included.
I think we understand that the promoters and the government, and we no doubt, and certainly they, would want no net loss.
Across the scheme.
Across the scheme, but the point's also been made that offset in Warwickshire is not going to help overwintering birds down the Colne Valley. So I think we've got a common understanding.
Well, you see, this is where I think one needs to be clear. The concept of no net loss, as you rightly say, is one that the project is committed to as a policy objective. The concept of offsetting is one that the project, which is not incorporated into this bill, precisely for the reason that the bill is intended to make the necessary provision to mitigate, compensate for the effects that it has on wildlife interests, without the need for offsetting. As you'll appreciate, Sir Peter, there are many cases where developers come forward with schemes which do affect nature conservation interests, and they don't have the land available to be able to provide the mitigation. So what they do under these new arrangements, this offsetting regime, is they pay some money to an organisation, an environmental bank, who then accumulates a sum of money which they can deploy elsewhere. We don't need to do that in this case because we're promoting a bill through Parliament which enables us to seek the powers to provide the remedy where a remedy is necessary without having to rely on some other party to use money that we pay through an offsetting regime. So the premise of this argument is a false one.
You're putting it that we may consider it's false. We may consider something a bit different. And I don't think we particularly want to hear you in opposition to either the petitioners or to the expert witness. I think what we would like to hear is that if Dr. Thornhill is right in saying that acknowledged loss is not properly balanced by proposed gain, that on the face of it looks as though there is a net loss. Now that may be something which you may have witnesses to say my understanding or what he was saying isn't right. But I think your particular line of questioning, I anticipate it's not going to get us terribly far.
No. Well, I'm just concerned that there should be that we should start on the right footing, as it were. I appreciate I'm merely presenting an argument, but
we don't need to go back much to 105.630, which, as Dr. Thornhill said, it's not just the area that matters, it's the quality and the use. But the 2 to 1 in terms of area is a significant thing. So, again, I don't want to repeat it, I don't want to provoke something, and if there's someone who's going to be a witness at some stage, the promoter saying, actually, there is no net loss in this sub-region, is probably the best way of putting it, rather than local area.
I'm sorry if this is going off the particular point, but it's designed to be helpful. We don't recognise this exercise as being useful.
You see it differently.
Yeah. What I can put to the witness is this. If you just take one example from here, standing water, which you've identified as a loss of 21.3 hectares, that is effectively treating, I think, all those areas, all those existing water bodies over which or through which the project goes, as being the area of those water bodies as being entirely lost to the scheme, doesn't it?
It does.
Whereas, in fact, of course, for those areas, the permanent impact is that we have the piers of viaduct going through it. Now, whether that is a fair way of expressing the loss is a matter which is open to question, I would have thought. Yeah? Do you accept that?
Can I say something?
Yes,
It's not you, it's not to me.
I think, as I did say, that the main point here is that what has been suggested, the offsetting calculation is not before us. We're not party to the iterative process that we know is happening within HS2 Limited and their subcontractors. This is the best I can come up with what I've been given. And even if it's broadly in the ballpark, it would concern me.
Well, okay. I mean, another one.
I can start this off or interrupt you earlier on. I think you've made a fair point about piers not taking up 21 hectares.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll bank that one. If we just, I take your point, Peter. You know, it's not for me to give the evidence; it's for Mr. Miller in due course. But can I just come back to the question of Broadwater Lake, just deal with that point? You've acknowledged that the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds have, in their letter of the 22nd of May, have indicated that they do not wish to pursue their petition in relation to impacts there. Now, of course, they are the non-governmental organisations, the committee is very well aware, who have a particular interest in the impact of development schemes on birds. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You've also drawn attention to a letter written by Natural England in relation specifically to the potential impacts of the railway upon a European designation, the Special Protection Area, which does not embrace Broadwater Lake, but with which I think ecologists broadly agree there is a degree of interaction. The birds from the areas to the south around Hounslow do use Broadwater Lake area. You will have seen, I'm sure, also the more recent correspondence from Natural England in February of last year, 2014, in which they did address specifically the impact of the scheme on the Mid-Colne Valley site of special scientific interest, which includes the Broadwater Lake. And in that letter, they said that, subject to the mitigation proposals that were included in the bill, they were satisfied that the measures were sufficient to mitigate and compensate for the adverse effects of the railway upon that site of special scientific interest. You've seen that as well, haven't you?
I have seen that.
And those measures are shown on P6113, which is shows measures I think the committee is very familiar with, because it looked at this plan, I think, in the context of the Wildlife Trust, which we can see the measures proposed include new gravel islands for roosting and so forth, some further wetland creation, habitat creation, and essentially those are the matters that Natural England were looking at when they pronounced themselves satisfied. And they, of course, are the statutory body with particular responsibility for sites of special scientific interest, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have both those bodies satisfied. And as I say, come back to the point, I don't think you suggest that they've got it wrong. I think you simply suggest that the promoter should, as it were, do more, but you don't specify what that more is, I don't think, before the committee, do you?
I haven't as yet.
No. All right. Well, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Could I say something on that?
If yes, we are.
We'd just like to highlight that in that letter from Natural England, 27th of February 2014, and I know this point has come up before, this is a subjective agreement on those mitigation and compensation details. And the first bullet point suggests that the quantum of new habitat will need to be sufficient to compensate both for the direct habitat loss and for that which will be no longer used. And I don't think it's therefore the clearest of statements, given that they could clearly see the areas that are concerned within this mitigation and compensation package which we referred to then suggest that there isn't clarity on the quantum of new habitat. I don't think it's quite the clearest of statements, and it is a subjective agreement after all.
Okay. Can I just ask a couple of matters, I suspect, arising in re-examination, please? First, my learned friend said to you, you just say there's more to be done without saying what the more is. Is there in fact more that could be done?
Well, I think there are opportunities, I'm sure. In order to do more, the bill limits would need to change. That's one issue. But I think in order to realise what those measures would be, it would involve a greater discussion with those with, as I say, a working knowledge of the site. And we also don't have particular clarity on exactly what these measures in here will be, but I appreciate that as detail, and that is a part of your assurance to Herts and Middlesex. That's those within the bill limits. I would have thought, with the preponderance of wetlands that are in the region, that something could be done if local stakeholders were consulted properly to improve those habitats, to make those potentially more suitable, well away from any potential disturbance. I think the new gravel islands, rafts for nesting and boosting water birds, I think there is danger there that putting that measure in, and indeed any of the others that are within and around an already functioning refuge area, does place extra strain on that refuge area in the first place too. And they may not be entirely suitable for those that you're attempting to provide a refuge for, particularly as the islands that are currently there are mature and vegetated, whereas you're likely to not provide idyllic habitat for those features of interest, such as those wetland birds I previously mentioned. So I think there are opportunities, but I think it needs to engage properly with local stakeholders and to look beyond the bill limits in order to realise them.
And the second question in re-examination is simply this. You were asked further questions about the RSPB and Natural England, and in the course of that there was touched upon A105630, the habitats lost and gained. Does anything that Natural England or the RSPB have said undermine, albeit as subject to your qualification as to the breadth of the document, that which is said in A105630?
No, in fact, if anything, it does support. For example, the RSPB response, where they withdraw their petition, it does actually say that there are other adverse impacts on this triplet size, such as loss of terrestrial habitats, which we did not specifically cover in our petition, and which other petitioners' evidence either has been or is likely to be heard in due course. So they continue to have issues with the amount of terrestrial habitat loss within the triplet side.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're adjourned now until 6 o'clock.
Thank you.
And then we'll take your remaining witnesses. Thank you very much, Mr. Straker. Order, order.